Guys, we're in the middle of the pandemic and these are trying times. It's hard on our mental health, our mental state. And this is why I love our sponsor today, BetterHelp. They're the largest online counseling platform worldwide. They change the way people get help with facing life's challenges by providing convenient, discreet, affordable access to licensed therapists. BetterHelp makes professional counseling available anytime, anywhere, through a computer, tablet, or smartphone. It's brilliant. Sign up today. Go to betterhelp.com/solvinghealthcare and get 10% off sign-up fees.
COVID has affected us all, and with all the negativity surrounding it, it's often hard to find the positive. One of the blessings it has given us is the opportunity to build an avenue for creating change, starting right here in our community. Discussing topics that affect us most, such as racism in healthcare, maintaining a positive mindset, creating change, the importance of advocacy, and the many lessons we have all learned from COVID. If you or your organization are interested in speaking engagements, send a message to quadcast99@gmail.com, reach out on Facebook at Quadcast, or online at drkwadwo.ca.
Welcome to Solving Healthcare. I'm Kwadwo Kyeremanteng. I'm an ICU and palliative care physician here in Ottawa and the founder of Resource Optimization Network. We are on a mission to transform healthcare in Canada. I'm going to talk with physicians, nurses, administrators, patients and their families because inefficiencies, overwork, and overcrowding affects us all. I believe it's time for a better healthcare system that's more cost-effective, dignified, and just for everyone involved. Quadcast Nation, it is with an absolute pleasure that I'm bringing PhD knowledge dropper, policy influencer, Irvin Studin to the table here. First of all, Irvin, welcome to the show.
It's a real pleasure, Kwadwo. And I thought you were talking about somebody else, so I was waiting for for my introduction.
Oh my goodness! So the reason we have Irvin on the show, so just in terms of context, he's the mastermind behind the Institute for 21st Century Questions, and really the mastermind of the science. We call it the Canada Science and Policy Committee to Exit the Pandemic. And this is all about recovery. And he approached me saying, we need to do something collectively as Canadians to really get us moving in the right direction. So I just wanted to get Irvin on to talk about why he brought this group together and what we're hoping to achieve. So maybe, Irvin, why don't we start with what were you seeing? What was the real driver to get this group together?
Well, first of all, Kwadwo, it's a real pleasure to be with you. And thanks for sincerely on behalf of many Canadians, young and old alike across the country, for your great energy over the last 2 years it has felt, for your friendship and collegiality. Thanks for having me. In truth, the energy is mutual on this committee. What I see and what you see, no doubt, is that we started the pandemic in 2020 in analytical terms as multiple solitudes. But the principal solitudes were that the medical community and the scientific community were at one end, and the policy community across all the disciplines was at the other end. And in truth, the policy community until 2020 was largely illiterate in science. Scientists played very marginal roles in public policy and have limited literacy to this day. But the policy community had very limited policy expertise and policy literacy, and it remained very weak in public policy across the systems. Now, in early 2022, as you and I have discussed on a number of occasions, we need to exit. We need to exit the pandemic for reasons we'll discuss, in part because other countries are exiting, and in part because other systems are disintegrating, not least the public health system, because the other systems are disintegrating. And we'll talk about some of those systems. So what I see on this Canada Science and Policy Committee to Exit the Pandemic is a marriage, a communion of those two solitudes at last. The scientific and medical community come together with policy experts across the country, literally across the country. It will be a policy lead. Science will feed into that amongst other disciplines. And we aim to exit. We aim to exit soon, practically, with energy, because the country's at stake and we're off balance hugely, and we have a duty. So I'm honored to work with you, my friend, as co-chairs on this committee. The committee is hugely impressive. It's across the country, all provinces, all territories, all regions, French and English, en anglais et en français. Partout au pays, on vient ensemble afin de sortir de cette tragédie, cette pandémie.
This is great. And like, I think what I love about it, as you mentioned, it's policymakers and the scientific community coming together to try and have solutions, to really try and have create a framework for a path forward. And like, why do we need this so badly? Like, what really drove you to set this up?
Well, I think first of all, we need it, as you and I have discussed on multiple occasions, and as I mentioned just now, we need for practical purposes because everyone is tired, population is tired, government is doing its work, but is, I think, analytically in many cases confused, tired, demoralized. We need to help them analytically and also by providing some of the requisite energy as a professional community and as advisors, as energizers to exit the pandemic. The pandemic really requires an energy push. One of the working theses or hypotheses of the committee is not that we zombie out of this pandemic 1 or 2 years from now. We kind of take the covers off. So what happened and we're out. It has to be the exact opposite. And so a lot of the pivots are counterintuitive. We need high energy because the pandemic collapsed many of our systems to very low energy equilibria, starting with public health, then education. We're actually in the middle of about 6 or 7 national crises of system. We need to, on the committee, and that's why we have such vast expertise, we need to exit all of them at the same time. The choreography is not just the pandemic and it's not just public health. If we think that narrowly, if we think that the pandemic is, and the exit is just ICU beds, or that just the exit is all vaccines or masks, we're too narrow, too reductive, and all the systems, including public health, no less, will collapse or disintegrate. We could lose the country. And that happens throughout history. So we're coming across 7 systems, and I'll just articulate them for your distinguished listeners. Public health broadly, of which the pandemic is a part. Education, massive catastrophe. It's a massive crisis, continues to be a crisis. The economy and business, institutions, national unity, the international space, the social fabric. And I'm missing one. I'm sure it will come to me in a second. So all of that in toto requires an energetic choreography to exit. And we're going to be speaking to all of it. The pandemic over time becomes the minor crisis, and that is an intellectual and a policy exit. The other things require energy in order for the pandemic not to amplify. And the pandemic itself must be treated on its face in the facts, consistent with best practice, but also with what's happening around the world.
And I think the reason, articulating the multiple sectors is so important because, we've been very single focused throughout the pandemic. And I think this is probably why we are in the place that we are. Like when you see how it's impacted, other sectors of health alone, but economy, the social our kids, the ability to socialize, the social norms, the education, like all these have been drastically impacted by COVID. And to really think of a recovery, all these factors need to be put into consideration. And this is what I love about the team. Like there's experts in all sectors that are so vital to our nation. And so, I think the strategy of, having multiple, not only policymakers and scientists, but also multiple sectors to be able to be so broad spectrum, but to encompass so much moving forward. So in terms of timelines, Irvin, like what's your dream? Like if you had the ability to look forward to what this group could achieve, and what kind of timelines do you think about? What kind of execution do you see in the future?
Well, as you know, we're starting our meetings this week. Mm-hmm. We're briefing out regularly. We're upping the media profile. We're going to be very deliberate on vocabulary, deliberate on changing some of the analytical frameworks and some of the pivots before I get to timeline that are essential for people to understand, because a lot of the collapse in Canada is due to a collapse in intellectual frameworks. We've reduced everything to a single moment, a single catastrophe. And as I said, in a country, the second biggest country on earth, as soon as you collapse 6 or 7 systems and even the pandemic to 1 or 2 metrics, you're in big trouble in the physical world. So we'll be moving from the episodic to systems thinking, low energy to high energy, capriciousness to stability. And we are from the abstract to the practical and the human. So we're really looking at the human context as well. And we're going to be reaching out to groups and experts around the country. I welcome, and I think you welcome as well, feedback from everyone. I'm on the phone regularly in emails and in chats with everyone, because one of the things that's been missing essentially in decision making is everyone's in Zoom rooms and no one is getting feedback to correct the mistakes of commission and omission, including the doctors. That's a tragedy because, in my view, the main legitimating factor of any democratic system is the feedback. As soon as you cut the feedback, we're no better than other systems in terms of legitimacy, and we're in many cases technically behind. So we need that feedback in our committee as well. We've already got the relationships. I see, to be honest, Kwadwo, I'm very aggressive on this. In the coming months, we're exiting as a country. We're going to be feeding into that. We need to give the courage to decision makers to exit across the systems. The exit must be demonstrative. It must not be a low energy zombing out, because as I mentioned, we collapsed into a low energy equilibrium. If we imagine that 2 or 3 months from now, all restrictions are removed, as some people request, actually, that's not good enough because we're still in a collapsed state. If you imagine that we remove all restrictions in the education sphere, we still have 200,000 kids not in any school at all across the country. And the content and quality and energy within the schools is too low, given the amount of education that's been missed and given the world of tomorrow, which is that much more difficult. So we need high energy there. On the pandemic side, we need much more intelligent parsing between those that are acutely vulnerable, those are aged and comorbid, who over time, even within an endemic situation, are vulnerable. But for the rest of the population, energy, and we need to address all of those conditions that have been unaddressed over the last 2 years, about which you spoke and continue to speak very eloquently. In the business and economic sector, if we remove all restrictions, we've still lost hundreds of thousands of businesses. So many people are either unemployed or not properly employed. You have business people that have lost capital, identity. We've got supply chain issues. It requires a very, very deliberate choreography across the systems. And that is an evolution in our thinking. But I think it's a thinking that will be welcomed by decision makers, both in public policy and the offices of medical health, because they're tired.
I hope people really appreciate this. Like, you know, one of the things that I think has led us to be in not an ideal spot with COVID is we've been really we're not proactive. We're very responsive. Oh, we got this problem here. This is what we're going to do, as opposed to thinking about 2 or 3 months ahead about what we want, where we want to go. And this is the beauty of this, because if you think about the issues that we just clearly delineated, your kids' education, the economy, you know, all these things we can't just walk into and just expect everything to our kids to be back up to speed, the economy to be up to speed. We need to proactively think of how we boost this, how we bring energy to the table, reinvigorate all these sectors, because we'll be lagging, you know, and this is part of the recovery. Energy, proactiveness, thought, excitement. And this is what I'm hoping. This is why I got excited to jump on the train, Irvin. You know, like I truly think this is something that the country needs and could get behind. And once again, this is holistic. It is looking at all key sectors that were impacted directly from the pandemic. So, you know, like, let's do this.
Well, Kwadwo, we're going to be really indebted for your energy and that of a lot of the scientists in particular, because the energy is so fundamental. You bring huge energy and always optimism. We need to get our young people dreaming again. We need the human energy. And when people hear us, you're distinctly, I'm talking about human energy. What people don't realize that is when there's a lockdown or a quarantine or even in a restriction exercise, government goes one way, the society goes the other way. They're all on Zoom rooms. And in the middle, you have this huge vacuum. The vacuum is that of human energy. And in the absence of human energy, we have disintegration of institutions. And that is what has happened. And government, unfortunately, through, I think, intellectual collapse, has not compensated that energy. Because as soon as you isolate the society, you need to go all hands on deck to make sure that sick people are tended to, that the education systems don't collapse, you don't get your third bucket kids, that businesses don't disintegrate through want of capital and clients. You need to flood it with energy. That requires a certain posture. And we want to re-insinuate that posture. We'll provide some of that with the committee. I also want to stress for scientific colleagues, with the greatest respect, the science side is extremely complex. It is weak naturally on public policy, which has its own complexities. And the reverse is true. It's a policy lead, which means we're not following the science as a science experiment or as a research project. That could last 100 years, after which Canada will have disintegrated several times over. And it is also not, as one Ontario colleague mentioned when they closed the schools, in my view, scandalously a couple of weeks ago, the virus is in charge. We're not in charge. No, actually, it's a policy lead in all cases. It's a science input. The virus is a huge context. We're going to have to deal with it as other countries are, but it is holistically, it is synergistically, and we are tackling it from all angles on the committee, recognizing that from the very start, Canada might be imagined as 7 or 8 balls being juggled at the same time. The pandemic is one of them. We're one part of the ball. If you drop any of the balls, then the entire system is at risk. And that's where we are. So when you get the balls back up, higher energy, optimism, and might I add that the kids are going to be a big part of that proposition, and they'll be key to re-insinuating some of the rhythm of our society.
Amen. This is, a huge driver for me is our children. Huge driver. Their mental health, their physical health, education. This is, in my world, these are drivers to what leads people into the intensive care unit when they're lacking. And massive driver for my involvement, and a huge fuel for me personally. And I know you feel the same way about your 3 little ones. Not so little. I guess they're not so little anymore, eh?
They're still little. I'm not so little anymore.
Amazing. Anything left? Any parting thoughts? Otherwise,
well, I just wanna give a big shout out to your listeners et pour tous les Canadiens et toutes les Canadiennes partout au pays. Il faut sortir très bientôt. We will exit soon. We will exit demonstrably and demonstratively. That is to say, if I may be direct, at some point, the masks come off. We will take the measure of the situation. The masks come off. At some point, the passports go. And this is all best practices in countries that are exiting. And at some point, we all get on the streets. We go to restaurants. We go play. We need to hear the children have wonderful summers. I need to hear the children educating, learning, because they have to prepare for a more difficult tomorrow. And we've not done well by them. So we have that mission. So all of this requires a choreography. When the dust settles, we will find that there are many dark spots where we've really missed the boat as a country. The committee, I hope, will see things from 360 degrees. Let me just add a few things. We're nonpartisan. We're non-ideological, strictly practical. We are patriotic in the sense that we're coming together as Canadians, I think, leaders in our fields, in the scientific, medical community and the professional communities, to exit. It is a tragedy and that is disintegrating our country, and we can't just be observers. So I think that is a felt mission. I think the timing is very good, and I hope we have good news and a ready audience.
I know it's gonna be well received, and thank you so much for involving all of us, Irvin. I think this is tremendous leadership that you've displayed throughout this pandemic. And those on Quadcast, those are listening live. This same podcast should be coming out on hopefully by Friday. But we really appreciate all the positive